So now it's time to open the second session dedicated to the biobanking. So this afternoon we will have 5 different presentations, 2 from IBBL, Integrated Biobank of Luxembourg, 1 presentation from Dutch Forensic, and another from Lifeline, and the final presentation from Horizon. Just before to start the presentation, I have just a question for all speakers. It's what is added value of robotic equipment for managing biological samples? You know, the triangle of quality, cost, and time, and so please try to place your vision of biobanking in this triangle and answer a question. So we'll start with the first speaker, Dominic, Helen. So I'm pleased to introduce Dominic. Dominic has been in the field for more than 20 years. Yeah. He was a commercial director and then managing director of bioanalysis division of Parexel. Then he was a director of bioservices at Thermo Fisher. And Dominic joined IBBL in 2009, right, as a chief operating officer, where he established a biorepository facilities. And thanks, Dominic, we'll introduce Biobank, automate or die, right? So please, audience for you.
Thank you very much. So firstly, thank you to the organisers for inviting us, and I'm pleased to be here with my colleague Connie Mathey. I'll be presenting more a high-level view as to what automation means in the context of a biobank, from a high level and all the way through the process. And then Connie will go into a significant detail onto one particular use of automation within our organisation. So, if I can get this thing to work. So firstly, a word as to what a biobank is. I'm afraid some of you will be bored, but maybe some of you don't actually know or haven't had it laid out this way. A biobank is an organization which, at its core level, collects, processes, stores, and distributes biological samples. It's as simple and as complicated as that, in the sense that you have to master the entire process from somebody's arm, where he's giving blood, or the operating theatre where the tumour is being removed, to the moment when it is on the desk, on the lab bench of a researcher who is going to be doing the biomedical research on it. As you know, many research findings cannot be reproduced. One of the principal sources is because this chain is not always completely held under control, and what the researchers are finding are in fact differences in that process, not changes related to some molecule in the sample and the phenotype or the clinical data of the patients. So this is about quality and about an integrated process. On the left, we have collection. Which could be of any sort: blood, urine, feces, tissue, CSF, saliva, any sort of tissue, any sort of sample. It is then brought from where it is collected to the laboratory, which is already a first source of potential error and problems with the samples. The time and the temperature of that transfer is absolutely key for the quality of the sample. The processing depends on the sample, of course, and can be anything from simple creation of serum or plasma through to lyophilization of CSF. It could be work on FFPE samples from pathology. There is a wide range of operations within the processing step, which is the second one. The third step is storage, waiting for someone to be interested in using it. And storage can take place normally at -80 or in liquid nitrogen. And there again, this is an area where more than had been expected 5 years ago, there is degradation taking place there in the storage. And I'll mention later on the impact that this is having upon the automation of the storage process. And then at the end, the distribution, where obviously the whole point of this is to give samples to researchers, and that is the end point of it. I should mention also that in parallel, there is the data which goes with it. A sample for your research is of no use at all unless you have the clinical data which goes with it. Clinical data also of good quality, like the physical tissue. What I've just explained is what we consider to be the core activity of our organization. On the right-hand side there, you see just the different steps which I've talked about. That is the core of what we do. We have a series of operations which are in addition to this, which are, as you can see there, and I would just focus on two of those, if I can find where I am, which is the biospecimen research and the research services in the middle there. I've mentioned that the samples and the quality of the samples is essential to what we do. The research that we do is about the samples themselves, not biomedical research. We have a research operation which looks into how the process affects the quality of the sample, which is then going to be used for research. We also provide biomedical research services, not the biomedical research, but the processing, for example, or biomarker validation that is needed. And then we have various areas of innovation here in offering services, I said, of biomarker validation, which is an area which we're developing. Now, the importance of this to automation is that by automating, we can free up resources for the top two parts of the triangle by automating and economizing resources in the part at the bottom. Another important aspect of a biobank is that it is unlike a research organization, it should be a totally quality-controlled organization. Research is about having great ideas and not being constrained. Obviously, the work has to be of good quality, but you don't want to be constrained to do everything the same way as it was done before. You won't find anything. But in the biobanking world, you need to be completely reproducible in everything that is done. So this is why we are 9001, NFS 96, which is a French biobanking norm, but also 17025, which we expect to be accredited to in a short while, to make the entire organization completely under quality control, again to limit the amount of variation that will be seen by the researchers at the bench. Just for interest, the samples that we have in store are these. On the right-hand side, you see services. That means samples being stored for other people. And around the top third on the left-hand side is disease. And of course, very importantly, controls, so that when a researcher needs a sample of any particular sort, he can have a matched control sample of the same type, age, and sex of the disease samples which he's studying. We use this a lot, this operation, this approach, within consortia in Europe. I won't go through all of these, but just mention the second one there, that with a quality organization which is not actually in the research area, we can provide an infrastructure for researchers and collaborative groups of researchers. We operate as a biobank, holding samples, processing samples to standard procedures, and making them available to researchers. So all of this is an activity, quality controlled and automated where we can, for quality reasons, in order to be able to serve research. So before me now transitioning actually into the automation itself, the reasons why we go for automation are those. To reduce human intervention. Humans make mistakes. So once you've got the systems up and running, the more you can remove people from the processes, in general, the better the quality. Extending the working day by having equipment, I'll show you in a moment, which can start several-hour processes at the end of the day, it allows us to extend our operations beyond the normal working day without having to add an additional shift. Clearly, we increase throughput and capacity, both in storage and in processing, reduce labor, and free up resources for other activities. From a business development point of view, it is clearly of interest to clients to know that we have processes which are automated and quality controlled. I've mentioned the interest of this to European and North American partner institutions and collaborative consortia. One thing, however, needs to be emphasized when talking about quality is that it's not because you automate that the quality is necessarily better. Going through the accreditation process, the automation, the robots, are actually considered as if they were operators. So when talking about the ability of an operator on a method to be consistent and to produce reproducible results, the same thing has to be thought of in the case of automation. And so in the accreditation world, automation needs to be taken into account, and there is a big investment required to validate the processes with an automated approach to them. Going into more detail as to what we have in terms of equipment and for which operations. For the blood processing, we're using a TCAN. In fact, we have two TCANs, and I'll show the difference on the next slide. This is for blood. We use for plasma, for serum, for buffy coat, and for urine. It should be down here somewhere. We use the benchmark from Ventana for immunohistochemistry for the pathology department, and the QIAGEN biorobot for the automated RNA extraction within the laboratory. So this is the detail of it. I mentioned we had two of the TCANs. The first one we bought was a fairly standard one, serum, plasma, and urine. The second one we have evolved by adding on these two elements, an integrated centrifuge. This is particularly useful for PBMC extractions, and a cooling bath, a cooling box, which allows the samples at the end of a production run after the working day to be left cool until the operators come in the morning. So it's a great use to us. So we now have these two machines, which apart from the one process which works on that, which is the PBMCs, otherwise they're interchangeable. And that's just the picture of the second one we have here, where you can see the level detector, decapping, most important, decapping for the two types of tubes that we have, the centrifuge underneath, cooling system, and the whole thing in a laminar flow hood. As you saw from the very first slide, working in a biobank is about long and integrated processes. And so from the previous slide, the TCAN there should not be thought of as a single element working on its own. It is within a complex process. The TCAN is working, actually the life starts with the samples which are being collected with 2D barcodes, registered in the LIMS system, put into the TCAN. From the TCAN, the buffy coat will go to the DNA extraction, and that may be delayed in the sense that we don't have to run that immediately afterwards. We can do it several days afterwards. From there, the plate for quality will go to the Synergy. So here again, we need to ensure that the information is passed between these two instruments. And finally, the information concerning the quality will be stored again in the LIMS, along with the quantification results. The output DNA samples from here will be put into storage, and again, the storage locations will need to be in the LIMS. So the point of this is to emphasize the fact that an automation platform is not a standalone item. It is part of a complete system, which can often be complex. I won't talk about the DNA extraction process, as Connie will do that in a moment. This is just a picture of the RNA extraction from, in general, we extract RNA from vaccine tubes with the 96 sample approach through the biorobot, using exactly the same chemistry as the QIAcube here, which we use for smaller volumes. And particularly for small volumes with for research samples, as it gives us a higher yield. But this one here is far lower in terms of unit costs. Just overall, this has taken us about a year from the original delivery of the first TCAN to having, sorry, 2 years. No, 1 year, so 12 to 13, that's right. It was 1 year of intense work to get the TCANs up and running and connected to the limbs. Moving now on to storage, that was a quick overview of the processing in the laboratory. The next step after that was storage of samples. This is a graph of our storage needs, actually, and shows that we're about here, okay? And we are pretty much at the tipping point where we are running out of space in our current building and are going to have to go for automated storage. So we're actually in the moment now. We do not have automated storage today, but are in the process of negotiating to acquire one. Storage in the biobank world it's actually quite interesting. If you look on PubMed and do and search on automation biobank, the first publication is exactly 10 years ago, and it was from a company in the States called Seracare, now Precision for Medicine, talking about automated DNA storage at +4. In those 10 years, the technology has changed enormously. The design concept of that first store is now obsolete. The company no longer exists, and we're in a completely new domain. What I get to here? Here's an example of one of today's storage systems at -80, where the samples are stored in here in sort of letterboxes, a robot which goes down the middle. These outside areas here are kept at -80, the middle at -20 for the reasons of robotics, and then an input-output section here. This is one design from one manufacturer, and there are 3 or 4 very good manufacturers today producing -80 stores. But the science has evolved, and we realized that a lot of stuff that was placed in store, a lot of samples which were placed in store 5, 10 years ago in -80, in confidence that they would be kept in good condition, we're realizing now that there is continuous degradation of the samples, particularly of peptides, of metabolites, and there are increasing number of publications coming out questioning the suitability of -80 storage for many samples. We've actually done quite a lot of research on this ourselves as well, and there is a movement now moving further and more towards storage in liquid nitrogen vapor, obviously not in the liquid itself. There are now 3 vendors providing an offer in this area. Nearly in fact, all of them are based on the standard LN2 storage tanks, which you all know, and very often are using a gantry system over the top to be able to share automation between the different liquid nitrogen tanks. So they dip into one and then move to the next and dip into the next. With a great attraction of modularity. If you have a gantry crane which is moving down, you can add on more modules as you have need for additional capacity. And nearly all of the vendors are using this approach, which is different from the -80, where you nearly always have to buy an enormous room one-off at the beginning, even before you need all of the capacity. Very big automation challenge is picking tubes at -150, below -130. To get automation to run at those temperatures, as you know, is very difficult, and it's on the edge at the moment. Most of the biobank picking operators work at -20 very happily, but don't even work at -80. So now to get ones working at below -130 is a significant challenge, and we're on the edge of seeing whether it actually is going to work in a robust way in the coming years. Shouldn't forget the cost. You mentioned cost earlier on. It can actually be cheaper to be storing in liquid nitrogen rather than in -80. The equipment is far longer living. The balance is mainly driven by the cost of the liquid nitrogen, but the equipment is far more stable. It's far longer living than mechanical freezers. And the economics for more than, depending on who's doing the sums, 10 years is almost always in favor of liquid nitrogen storage. And as I was saying, the science is favoring a move to these lower temperatures. Last point I wanted to cover was that of data. Without data, the sample is useless. We spend an enormous amount of money collecting good quality clinical data to go with the samples. And it's very painful because you need to have people going out into the clinics, into the hospitals, collecting information. Even if you're using an ECRF system, the costs are high. You're talking about people out there, you're talking about the data monitoring to check the incoming data, and data management and actual monitoring, as in clinical trials, to check that the raw data has been faithfully transcribed into the database. And so we're working a lot now on the direct transfer of files from the hospitals, the clinical laboratory data, the pathology reports, and from patient medical files. The obvious gains here are in speed, quality, and cost, but always subject to the availability of this information. Electronic health records, we talk a lot about them, but there are actually very few that work well. A lot of hospitals talk about it, but the actual ability to collect information of good quality from them is still today very limited. And synoptic pathology reports are, again, a massive challenge. The pathology world seems to, me being an engineer here, seems to love writing poetry in their pathology reports. And it's very difficult to move towards a structured report which is automation friendly, which is data and database friendly. But here there are big opportunities for quality and cost improvement. Some of my friends in the laboratory, I'm an engineer, by the way, I'm not a biologist. So I'm very happy to have lots of biologists in the biobank who understand these things. And sometimes I find within the research world that they would prefer to say that it's automate and die rather than automate or die, because it doesn't always go right. And actually to recognize that, along with IBBL, I don't know if any of you have heard of IBBL, is the International Society for Biological and Environmental Repositories. It's the World Biobank Jamboree. Within that organization, that society, several colleagues have set up a working group, which is called the Integrated Biobank Workflows Working Group. And it's really about how can integration and automation go wrong, because it does. And this is a group of people working to bring along horror stories of how things have gone wrong and to learn how to do it right and how to prevent and how to avoid some of the pitfalls that have happened in other organizations, because there are lots of them. I mean, we've come a cropper in a lot of areas with barcoding labels, which hate automation, as you know. We've had decappers, which have managed to crash in the liquid handlers. I see somebody over here nodding his head. Maybe you've done the same thing. Scanning failures on primary tubes, 2D barcode scanning failures in the DNA extractor. Maybe Connie will mention that later. Things can go wrong. And so we need to have a very robust approach, and I think also a very transparent approach, rather than saying everything's always wonderful. Things can go wrong. Even the most simple things. You take a scanner, you put it into your laptop, and you scan something. And a lovely little number comes up there, and you think, hunky-dory, off we go. But all that the scanner is doing is pretending to be the keyboard. Now, think about Luxembourg. Luxembourg speaks German, French, English, and Luxembourgish. and you've probably got somebody from a Swiss company there as well. So I think you've been there as well. So you plug it in and you scan it, and depending what the computer is you have, you get a different number coming up. Now, so sometimes it's just the difference between a Y and a Z. You try and you're not going to see that. So sort of one example of how easy it is for things to go wrong. So what we do is we actually bolt the scanners to a particular PC so that you can't go off and use them on another PC. You have to get down sometimes to things which are as limiting as that. Other things we put, just to drill on that particular example, we have test barcodes up all over the place so that you can test, using any old scanner, a barcode to see that it gives the right answer. Because if you're using one in the wrong keyboard, it'll give the wrong answer. And then that goes into the LIMS system, wrong tube ID, and you really have problems. So, what's the good news? Reduced operator time, overall unit costs are coming down. Massive increase in throughput. In general, I put that little caveat in there, improvement in quality. Improved standardization. Also, automation helps us to encourage the researchers to use standardized procedures. It's amazing how if you tell them that we'll do this processing for you and it'll cost you one somethings for each tube, but we'll do anything you like and it'll cost you 10, suddenly, the standardized process becomes very attractive. And we've found that this is extremely useful automation to put forward the standardization method approach within all of our collaborative partners. Extended working day, I talked about, business development important, but clearly reduction in flexibility. You can't have everything. High initial investment. We underestimated, yes, the investment you need up front to validate and to implement, and particularly to integrate the data when you have a complex flow. And don't forget the backup systems, because yes, they'll stop working. So you either need two or you need humans who can pick up halfway through a process and take it forward. So why this is my last two slides. So why automate and die? Or die? The reason is really for us is related to what we're here for. Biobanks are often touted as things that should be self-sustaining. They will never be. Biobanks don't pay for themselves. If you can get a biobank to generate revenues which covers 20% of its cost, you're doing pretty well in terms of the general practice within, 20% is doing well. Because samples are not worth much compared to the amount it costs to collect them. And there's an over-subsidization of the industry in the sense that government are putting large amounts of money into biobanks. So the actual cost of collection is being subsidized, and in a competitive market, we shouldn't talk about a market in samples because we're not selling these things, but there is an exchange of money against the sample. There is an oversupply of samples compared to the demand. So you can never expect to recover your full costs when passing on samples to other people. The government, therefore, or some organization, some funding body, will always be funding biobanks. And after a while, they're going to ask the question, okay, what are we getting in return? We've paid you all these millions. What are we getting back? And one of the subjects which you'll find a lot in the domain of biobanking is the question of sustainability. People are getting worried of what's going to happen in 5-10 years' time, because already there are the first biobanks that are closing down. There have been several important cases of big collections of extremely interesting cancer collections, for example, from Encore in the UK. No more funding to carry it on. From our side, we are very focused on what the Luxembourg government is expecting from us. Yes, they're expecting us to support research, but also they are expecting an economic return for the country by being an infrastructure within Luxembourg, supporting research and helping to attract economic activity. So that is, if you like, very simply on the left-hand side, we're being given subsidies and grants on the left-hand side. We're doing a lot of stuff in the middle, and the government, the taxpayer, is quite rightly hoping to get something out at the end in terms of diversification of the economy, industrial contracts, jobs, and the rest of it happening at the right-hand side. And automation for us is one way of contributing to high quality, low cost processing and freeing resources to do exactly what is in here, which is what is going to mean that we are sustainable or not and viable or not in the 5, 10, 15, 20 years to come. Thank you.
So we have time for one question.
Or leave it in when,
yes,
Just a very simple and technical question. What is the difference between minus 130 degrees compared to minus 80 degrees in terms of automation?
So what's the relevance of minus 130?
What is different in terms of how you have to automate your process at the different temperatures, at this different temperature?
The big difference when you go down in temperature is the ability of mechanical machines to actually work. Your lubricants freeze up. The mechanics below minus 20 start getting very difficult. So I don't know, was that?
But when you are at minus 80, it's
yes.
already difficult.
Yes.
And it's at more difficult at minus 130. And what exactly is different between the two temperatures?
Good point. I don't know. All I know is that the colder you get, the mechanics get more and more difficult. I think just everything poses a problem. For example, flexible cables. Start having cables which are bending continuously at minus 130 can pose problems. Roller bearings, dimensions and fits between. I have no idea, for example, whether PTFE works at minus 130. There's probably some engineers around here who know. But getting mechanical grippers, I mean, you know what these little VAR is, about the thickness of a pencil, about that long, to be able to pick that out with fingers at minus 130, it's a challenge. So I can't answer the question in terms of the specific things that go wrong. What I do know is once you get down even beyond minus 20, things go wrong, and you just look at the time it's taken to get the new systems online from the manufacturers, and it's not a straightforward mechanical problem, but it's basically mechanics.
Thank you, Dominic.